Pheroze Nowrojee was a distinguished Kenyan, one of the finest legal minds that Kenya has ever had. He was a great legal mind. That many people know. But many people might not know that there was another feather to Pheroze's achievement. He was one of the most prolific, one of the most perceptive writers that Kenya has ever produced. And I remember him talking many things, but there's one thing that I've always carried with me when he said that when you read the history of Kenya, you should read it always with a pinch of salt. He was cautioning because he knows that history or any piece of literature can be distorted. I got to know about his departure through our mutual friend, the famous Kenyan writer and painter, Professor Elizabeth Nowrojee, who called me to say that, Khainga, have you heard that your friend is no more? It was very shocking over the weekend when Professor Elizabeth passed this information, this sad news to me. So my name is Khainga Okwemba. I'm a presenter and a producer at Kenya Broadcasting Corporation. I work with KBC English Service as the presenter and producer of that premier literature program called The Books Cafe. I also present the Saturday breakfast show on KBC English Service called The Weekender. Apart from that, I edit the KBC official magazine called The Musts. It's actually produced under the corporate department, the corporate affairs department, under the guidance of the corporate affairs manager, Mrs. Evelyn Mwakina, and I help in looking out for the stories and putting the magazine together with a team of very talented colleagues and designers. So that's what I do. Outside of KBC, I'm a writer, I'm a poet, and I guess that is why I'm here, because of my writing and my literary activity. Pheroze Nowrojee was a distinguished Kenyan, one of the finest legal minds that Kenya has ever had. He was a great legal mind. That many people know. But many people might not know that there was another feather to Pheroze's achievement. He was one of the most prolific, one of the most perceptive writers that Kenya has ever produced. And I guess that is how I came to know him, through my activities, mingling with writers and meeting writers. And then I came to know Pheroze Nowrojee also as a writer. Yes, so he was this great Kenyan writer, a great legal mind. Now, Pheroze Nowrojee wrote many books. In the course of this conversation, I think I'll touch on a few and what those books are all about. Yes, you asked me, when did I first meet Pheroze Nowrojee and how did we become friends? I cannot remember exactly how it happened and when it was that, but I remember the events that brought us together. At one time, we actually shared a platform as columnists for the Star newspaper when I generated a literary column in that newspaper, that daily newspaper called The Literary Postcard. And Pheroze Nowrojee also was writing for the same magazine. I also remember Pheroze Nowrojee some years back when he was invited as a guest speaker at the now defunct National Youth Council. And he had been invited to talk to the youth that had been gathered from across the nation. You know, this National Youth Council used to organize an annual meetup for young Kenyans from across the nation, and they would talk about things, social issues that affect the nation. And Pheroze Nowrojee was invited as a guest speaker. And I remember when Pheroze Nowrojee went onto the stage to talk to these young Kenyans, and the amphitheater the KICC was full, overflowing with these young Kenyans. And I remember him talking many things, but there's one thing that I've always carried with me when he said that when you read the history of Kenya, you should read it always with a pinch of salt. He was cautioning because he knows that history or any piece of literature can be distorted. Sometimes it is very subjective. So he was telling us that yes, read and read, but always read with a pinch of salt. And that distortion did not just start that there are Kenyans who might want to distort literature or the history of this nation. It goes back with the way the Africans were written about by those foreign apparitions or the people who came, who conquered the continent. They denigrated the African people, made the African look subhuman. You remember that very famous book by Joseph Conrad called The Heart of Darkness, where Africans are actually created as subhuman. So Pheroze was telling us that when you read any book about yourself as an African, as a Kenyan, read it with a pinch of salt. I remember that. And after that, he stayed for a few minutes, and then he walked out of the stage, and I followed him. He used to drive a very small car. He was a very humble man, in spite of his larger than life personality, his success as a legal mind, very distinguished, in the legal fraternity. He lived a simple man. So he walked out of the stage and he was going to his small car. I believe it was a Peugeot. And I went to him to just say hi and say that, just to, to just have a conversation with him. And he called me out and he said, "The people's poet." And I said, "Mwalimu." Yeah, because I knew through my readings and just, as a writer and as a journalist, you are always a perpetual student of history. And I knew that Pheroze Nowrojee, as a lawyer, he had also taught at the University of Nairobi, and he had also taught at the University of Dar es Salaam. So I knew that there were many Kenyans who he had taught. So I called him Mwalimu, and he laughed. He hugged me, and we had a conversation, and then he drove away. That is one moment that I really recall, that very close interaction between me and Pheroze Nowrojee. I also remember another occasion, again at the same event at KICC, where a group of Kenyan writers under the auspices of PEN Kenya Center, which is an affiliate of PEN International, the world's oldest association of writers, we had organized an event to celebrate the legacy of this famous Palestinian poet, Mohammed Darwish. And among the great literary minds who came for that event was Professor Chris Wanjala, the late writer Marjorie McGoey Oludhe, the Sudanese poet and literary scholar Professor Taban Loliong, and Philo Ikonya. So I remember Pheroze Nowrojee again attending that event. And then over the years, we became very close. We met at many events. I remember again flying with Pheroze Nowrojee to Kisumu on the same flight and sitting with him when we organized a public reading of this book by Michaela Wrong called It's Our Turn to Eat. And the self-effacing person that he was, when I called him to ask him that, Pheroze, we are planning this public reading of Michaela Wrong's It's Our Turn to Eat. It's a book about Kenya. And I requested if we could actually be part of the team or the writers that were going to Kisumu. And him as a writer, yes, but we also needed a legal mind around us just to feel protected. Yeah, so yeah, he accepted, and yeah, we arranged and we went with him. We flew together to Kisumu, had a wonderful session there, and then we came back to Nairobi. Yeah, so there are many things that I can say about Pheroze Nowrojee. For me, or to me, he was a friend. He was a mentor. Yeah, after those initial days, we met at many other events that maybe in the course of this conversation, I'll actually be touching on them. Pheroze Nowrojee was a prolific writer. He was both, he was a poet, he was a journalist, he was an essayist, he was a biographer, he was a writer of short stories. When he wrote the biography of his family, trying to trace the roots of his family, how they came to Kenya, he sought me out because at that time he already knew that I was hosting the Books Cafe. And he sent me the book, that biography. It's called A Kenyan Journey. Okay? A Kenyan Journey is a biographical book that traces Pheroze Nowrojee's family roots. That the first of the family to arrive in Kenya came in 1896, and he was his great grand uncle called Motaboy Darabsho, his great grand uncle who was the first to arrive from India in Kenya in 1896 as a locomotive driver. And after that, Pheroze Nowrojee's now grandfather would actually join also as a locomotive driver. But Pheroze themselves, if you go back into history, his family actually originated from Persia, the present day Iran. Okay? Yeah, so he's a Parsi. As if you look at his ancestry, he's a Parsi who left, the Parsis who left Iran those many centuries ago and settled in India. And then they were assimilated into the Indian society or the Indian community. So when his great-grand-uncle Motaboy Darabsho came to Kenya in 1896, he came among that group of Indian coolies who came to build the railway. Okay? So that is a little bit of Pheroze Nowrojee's ancestry. His father was a lawyer. Okay? So Pheroze Nowrojee actually took after his father because his father was a lawyer during the struggle for independence. And at that time, of course, the colonialists would arrest Kenyans on some very flimsy things. And his father would represent many of them. They used to call it, Pheroze Nowrojee told me, they used to call it a pauper's brief. A pauper's brief. These are lawyers who would actually represent people who could not afford to hire a lawyer. So that is Pheroze Nowrojee. He was born in Nairobi and then started his schooling in Nairobi. Shortly after, he was taken to India. That is where he did his secondary and high school education. And then for his legal training, he went to London. And then from London, he went to Yale. Okay? In the United States of America. Yeah. So we've spoken about A Kenyan Journey, that a book that stresses his family roots. Okay? There's another book that he wrote about the Asian community in Kenya called Dukawala. Okay? There's that one. And when he wrote these books, I brought him here to have him as a guest on the Books Cafe. I hosted him on the Books Cafe. And I remember, again, very emotionally, after the program, Pheroze Nowrojee told me that, Khainga, can I buy you lunch? And he said that, let us go to the Norfolk Hotel. And he took me to the Norfolk Hotel. He bought me lunch there. And we had quite a discussion. And it was during that moment, as we walked out from the Norfolk Hotel, I suggested to him that, Pheroze, why can't we launch these books at the Goethe Institute, where I have some very good friends? And the humble Pheroze Nowrojee said that, Khainga, you mean you can do that for me? I said, yes, with my friends, we can do that. And we organized the launch with the live audience, recorded by also KBC, because the KBC technical team went there. And we had a wonderful, wonderful book launch. But as we were walking to KBC, I remember Pheroze Nowrojee stopping and then holding my hand and pulling me close. And he said that, Khainga, you know, you've interviewed so many writers. There's one book that I want you to write. And this is the book that I want you to write. I want you to just start thinking, recollecting, remembering those moments, when you first met these writers that you brought onto the Books Cafe. Can you try to recreate those moments and write a book? It will be a very rich book. And he told me that you start, you'll never get stuck, because I'll help you to put that book together. Unfortunately, Pheroze Nowrojee departs before Khainga embarking on that project that he was prodding me to embark on. I hope that one day I'm going to write that book. And when I write that book, among the writers who will appear in that book will be my friend and mentor, the great writer and lawyer Pheroze Nowrojee. He wrote, his last book was called The Station Master. And when he was writing this book, when he was in the midst of putting it together, I met him at the launch of the former Vice President Moody Awori's book, Riding on a Tiger. So Pheroze Nowrojee was there with his wife, Vilu. And when I spotted him, I went to him and greeted him. And he pulled me close and he said that, Khainga, I'm just in the process of finishing my collection of short stories. When I'm done, I'll get in touch. So we left on that note, and I knew that the moment that book would come out, I'll actually look him out and then I'll bring him onto the program. Now, a few weeks later, after that meeting at the launch of Moody Awori's memoir, Riding on a Tiger, Pheroze Nowrojee called. I was at the station. So he called, but we couldn't talk because every time the phone was faulty. And I tried to call him back. We didn't manage. And then we lost contact for some time. But I knew that call was about that book, The Station Master, the collection of short stories that he had actually just told me about. And then he left. So he moved to the States, relocated to America, where he was now spending a lot of time in America and in Kenya. So we didn't speak for a very long time. And then just a few weeks ago, not long ago, I met him at the memorial of Pheroze Nowrojee, the famous journalist, at the National Museum. And when he saw me, he just burst into laughter. He hugged me and we spoke. And he told me that, Khainga, I'm going to be around for some time. Now we can actually pick up on the conversation that we started. So that was the conversation that we had, and I was supposed to actually bring him back onto the Books Cafe so that we talk about his latest book, The Station Master. Again, that is the interview with Pheroze Nowrojee that I never had. But yes.
Do you know the reason why he moved to the USA?
Yeah, I think when he's, I'm not very sure why, but with age and after he slowed down as a going to court, and he has family. I think his daughter lives in America. His son used to live in the UK. I think he's still there. So I think maybe sometimes when as a child you feel that when your parents are at a certain age, you just want to be close to them, so you invite them. So I guess it could have been something coming from the daughter inviting him, just saying, Papa, you can come so that at least you spend time in America. When you want to go back home in Kenya, you can always go back. So it could be that it was just the initiative of the daughter wanting to be closer to the parents. Yeah. There are many lessons, many good things that we should cherish and remember Pheroze Nowrojee for. That sometimes you have to stand up for something. Stand up for something. Be principled. Be humble. Pheroze, he actually confirms that some of the most successful, some of the greatest people in the world are the humblest people that we'll find. Pheroze was humble in spite of his great legal mind, in spite of him being one of the most prolific Kenyan writers. So be humble. Read, at least to understand things. Write, document your history as a people. Because if you don't do, somebody else will do it, and they'll not do it well. Because, as the African saying goes, before the lion tells his story, the story will always be told by the hunter. And that is the story of Africa, that the people who started writing about Africa distorted the story of Africans. They created them and believed in what they created, that Africans were subhuman. They denigrated the African people, and that is how they were able to justify racism or slave trade and colonization. Okay? Today, as the presenter and producer of the Books Cafe, I can tell you, even Kenyans, some Kenyans who are writing today, they still distort Kenya's history. Okay? So if you don't read and you pick that text that has been distorted, where the history of Kenya has been distorted, you'll believe in that history. But if you read and read, you will know that this is a distortion of my nation, of my country's history. Those are the lessons that one would pick from Pheroze Nowrojee. The last one, I would say that Pheroze was a patriotic Kenyan. He was a patriot.